Okay. Greetings and welcome. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. Thank you for joining us today for the first installment, the first episode of Connections. I am pleased to be joined here today with our dear friend, Sheikh Idris Watts, and we hope to have a series of conversations, inshallah ta'ala, on the nature of trauma, on the nature of healing in the Islamic paradigm, and really talking about the relevance of these sorts of things in our time, in our day, inshallah ta'ala. So a little bit about myself. My name is Dr. Mazen Atasi. I am the founder of Forward to Health, a naturopathic holistic initiative based out of Chicago. We practice natural medicine, homeopathy, hydrotherapy, nutrition, and I do trauma work. I do somatic-based trauma work, alhamdulillah, and we have students and patients all over the world. And maybe Sheikh Idris, assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for joining us today.
No problem, it's a pleasure.
Could you share a little bit about yourself, Sidi, and just introduce yourself?
Yeah, assalamu alaikum, everybody. I accepted Islam in 1999, I think it was. Studied at Leeds University Arabic, and then I went over to Morocco. I was blessed actually to be that contingent that attended the Rihla in Fez in 1999. So that's when I became Muslim, just before that. So that had a profound impact on me. So I just, after I graduated, went to study in Morocco and lived there for many years, so around 10 in total. And then came back to England, working in the Muslim community. And I've been in Islamic education. And then I became interested in working in therapy and counseling because I realized I sort of, not by choice, by default, started having to deal with a lot of the community issues, me and my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I didn't have the skills. So after a lot of searching, came across Hakim Archuleta, as you and me have both studied with him. And that was a profound experience, a year working with him online. And then decided to get some formal training in somatic work. So I'm a somatic experiencing, just about to graduate this year, inshallah. The COVID's put a little bit of a halter on that. And then obviously Mazen studied NAM, which is a sort of a branch or a development of the somatic work into more psychosomatic work. So I thought it'd be interesting. I think Mazen thought it'd be interesting as well for us to sort of come together and explore this topic of trauma and how it affects a community and what we can do as a community as well in order to address the challenges that we're facing in this modern age. So this is these conversations the two of us are planning to have, and just I'm just interested about what emerges from these interactions and connections.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm honestly also just so pleased to have you on this call with me. I don't know anybody more fitting to be able just to explore the dynamics of these issues that we're both seeing on the ground here. And we're hearing, whether social media or from, the Muslim news channels, wherever they may be, and we're hearing and we're seeing and we're dealing with things. And I really don't know anybody better. You were the first person that came to mind when this idea of this conversation was inspired to me. So alhamdulillah, thanks for joining. So, we wanted to keep this informal, so we don't really have anything too rigidly prepared. I did want to start with definitions. So maybe we can share a little bit about trauma, this word trauma, and how, just give a little bit more definition to it and help us understand your perspective on it, please.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I like to set the sort of reservations sometimes I have around the word trauma itself is how it's just become a real sort of in word these days, and it's really hard for people. I think there's a lot of people have sort of a conception of what it is. So some people dismiss it because of they think it's sort of over exaggerated and used in a hyperbolic sense and over exaggerated. And I think other people, people have many different perspectives on it. So I like to simplify it, to be honest. And it's really just obviously it means a wound. linguistically. But I like to look at it as it's something that sort of gets ruptures our sense of self from a psychological perspective, and an emotional perspective. It ruptures us whereby we can't seem to, it sort of pulls at our focus like a splinter. It enters our sense of self, and it really preoccupies us and prevents us from being able to function in a healthy way, so that we can see things with a more peripheral vision. So it ends up us either being blindsided, like we become completely oblivious to things that are really important for us to deal with in our lives, or we overreact. These two, in somatic experiencing, we talk about overcoupling and undercoupling. So overcoupling would be, Mazen, you say something to me like, oh, I really, you praise me or something, but I've been sort of patronized as a youngster in my life constantly. And I sort of have this abreaction to it. So an overcoupling would be where I become really like emotionally charged at what you said to me. Don't objectify, don't think you can butter me up or something like this. And, what do you want from me, Mazen? That would be an overcoupling. And then, so you couple the situation that you're, you praising me to an actual reaction within me. They're coupled. And then the undercoupling would be where I just go into a shutdown. So say you praise me and I feel shame. I just almost go numb to the situation and almost space out. So I just lose my sense of presence. So looking at that, trauma is something that takes us away from presence, if you want to look at it like that, for me. And remember, and for me, presence is when we're present, with ultimate presence, fundamentally feeling that presence, that's when things are moving, that's when things are healing, that's things when we go into flow states and we feel that we can actually have a sense of relationship to what we're engaging with in our lives, and we don't feel either debilitated or overwhelmed or swept away by it, almost as it controls us rather than we actually feel some sense of autonomy in the present moment. So that's what comes up for me and I'm sure many other things, but that's what comes to me.
Yeah, it's a complex affair. And, what we know now as the human being is not just, this flat land of being, but really complex, interwoven, interdimensional being in some way, really, with the ruh and the jism and the nafs. In some way, this wounding, this lesion you're talking about that happens from this sense of overwhelm can cut through multiple levels of our being. It's not just so simple. You talked about kind of the cut on the skin and how, when that happens, there's a mobilization by the vital force, by the ruh, by the life principle, by the homeostatic mechanisms of the body to repair that. And, I think you and I both believe that that similar process can also occur at the more subtle levels of being with, other types of interventions, for example. So here, maybe if there was a lesion physically, it would bring the two flaps together. So you would bring some sort of connection to the wound. You'd connect them, you'd seal them, and then naturally the vital force will tie it back together. But in terms of, maybe we can say, the more subtle aspects of our being, psychologically, emotionally, relationally, these subtle bodies that we have, the spiritual body, maybe we can say as well, what would be the intervention that would be most indicated to heal that wound? It's also something along the lines of bringing something together, connecting two pieces together. And from there, that, with compassion, with safety, with non-judgment, with non-pressure, magical things, if you will. I mean, that word kind of is a charged word, but amazing things, bewildering things, ajib things happen when that is done, right? And so this idea, though, that there's this overwhelm, there's this lesion, there's this cutting and splintering that moves us from presence, that moves us from our hearts, really. And that's what I've been kind of exploring recently, is this idea of trauma simply disconnecting us from our hearts. Just trying to, because people sometimes tell me, I'm not getting the science, it's too many words, and I just want to just understand it briefly. And one day I just said, it's really just what moves you away from your heart. It just breaks your heart in some way. And okay, that, you know, I got it. And then so this whole process is about me healing my heart and coming back into contact with my heart. Yeah, exactly. Done.
Yeah. And I think this is an interesting point around the trauma is like just get over it. I think the important distinction here is, there's some wounds that you can just get over and time does heal. You know, like for example, if I have a cut or I have a splinter, eventually the body is able to galvanize the forces by itself to heal. That is possible. But if it's a major, breakage of the bone, like you were just saying, is that it does need some external support to hold it in place. It doesn't do the healing, but it holds so the healing can take place. And in trauma healing, it's about that, the community or another individual being able to hold space for that person and feel that they're held, so that they actually can feel safe to come back to presence, and then the healing happens. And so that's often people, why don't people just get over it, or time will heal? That's another classic. Or focus on the positives you have, and so forth. But how do we know that we have? I mean, the interesting question to then propose is, how do we know we're traumatized? And for me, it's that I'll be curious about what you have to say. But it's, for me, trauma is something that no matter what I've tried, I can't seem to move away from this thing that seems to be constantly sabotaging any sort of vitality I feel in my life. And so if you've tried, I talk about this concept of 3 strikes and you're out. Like if you've tried 3 times at something and it's not, and it's not really doing anything, then we have to be open to exploring other avenues. And so it's having that, yes, sometimes we do have to be determined to sort of attempt something, and there might be some element of persevering, but we've also got to ask the question at some point, well, if we've been persevering and we keep collapsing and feeling frustrated, we have to be open to other alternatives. So that's an interesting thing to me about, like, and with somatic work, it's like to ask that, how often in your day do you feel, or how often in your life do you feel that you're not present? How often do you feel you're distracted? How often do you feel like overwhelmed? How often do you feel explosive? If these are constant recurring themes in your day, in your life, then there may be that might be something you need to tend to, and time won't heal it, and just trying to get over it and push through won't solve it either. So I think that's a very nice, like, simple litmus test, barometer to measure whether you do suffer from trauma in your life or not.
Yeah, if it's working or not. Do you feel good or not? Are you well? I mean, one of the things I like to gauge, I ask people about their relationships. How's your relationship with your spouse? How's your relationship with your friends, with your colleagues at work, your boss, your parents, your children? And I asked them about these things, and they're like, "Wow, I've never been asked in a medical intake how my relationships are." But really, it's like in that, in the relational dynamic, so much of our stuff, verbal, nonverbal, conscious, unconscious, shows up, and it's such an amazing thing to be able to really. Are we still with me?
Okay.
Are you with me?
Yep, I'm still with you.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I lost you. I wasn't sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so what was I saying? Just the video.
It shows up in all our relationships.
It shows up in our relationships, yeah. And even as the Prophet ﷺ said, the believer is the mirror of the believer. And so being able to gauge who we are and how we are in our relationships becomes a very important way that we can really objectively see. Because if we were to take account of ourselves in some way, we have so many blind spots. We have so many cognitive and emotive frames and filters, and we have blocks of perception that are there in place by the very, perhaps we can say, compensations or adaptations to trauma that emerge that keep us from having to face it. But we end up having a block and an incapacity to face and look at ourselves in a real way as a result of that. And so really being able to, just assess that as subjectively as possible, but also asking about the relationships.
No, I mean, I love that. I mean, I think trauma prevents you from being in relationship.
Totally.
In a healthy way. So I'm really curious when someone comes and says, let's have a conversation about, a quite triggering topic or a challenging topic. And if that person just says no, like they almost put they stonewall you and they're just saying, I'm not willing to discuss this. I'm always really curious. What comes up for me there is that person is he doesn't have the tools to work with this. And that's something they really need to be curious about and explore, rather than sometimes even justify ourselves religiously, that I'm not dealing with this conversation because, he gives some religious justification for why we don't explore this. But if it's something that's really inhibiting being in relationship, it really needs to be explored.
Absolutely. I mean, what just came to mind now as you said that was, and you know better, this hadith of the branches of faith. And the least of them is removing an obstacle from someone's way.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I mean, and just so like, that's my intention when I...
Wow, I like that. Yeah, because the literal meaning would be move something from the roadside, but relationally, it's about,
from their life journey, like what's coming in the way of their spiritual, emotional, relational, seeking their purpose in life, whatever that may be, what's coming in the way of that, And if there's something consistently there for 5-10 years, there's something really there. It's not just a lack of word or, lack of a prayer or an affirmation. Like there's something really wrong. And there's not something broken or something shameful about that, but you need maybe perhaps to acknowledge what's going on and get some support to get you moving. But it's like, that's my intention, really. There's something in the way for sure. And the more that we can begin to be trauma informed, and this is really what the essence for me is trauma informed is people are not broken because they're stuck or because they maybe, are not able to have healthy relationships or take care of themselves in a good way or, show up for their families in the way that they really want to, but can't. They're collapsed, they're burnt out, they're afraid, whatever may be in the way of that. That becomes, for the community, for the family, for the imam, for the teachers, for the community members to really be tuned into. This person's not a bad person. He's not a broken, defective person. This person's just stuck. And really, I mean, I have yet to meet anybody who's not in some way stuck. We're all in process. That's my whole, and I've humanized everybody way more through this process. Like we're all in this together. I'll kiss your hand if you're a sheikh or an elder or something, but I know still, older, younger, we're all in this together. And the more we can bring this trauma-informed perspective and remove the shame and the blame and just humanize people and help people, not break people down and name them and break them, be there for people. This is really what good community should be like.
But also naming, I think the other side of that is naming, look, we have a responsibility and we can't, because that's the other thing of trauma. People might use it as an excuse to say, well, I'm traumatized. I can't deal with this. And that's the really important piece is, like what comes up for me when you share that is that I deal with clients time and time again is, look, before we can solve something, we need to learn to sit with it. And another trauma response is like, what's a solution? I need to solve this. And I talk about, in learning, we talk about the 4 stages of learning: unconscious incompetence. So I don't even know it's there. I'm unconscious of it. So I don't even know that for example, I don't even know that I bad talk my wife, for example, in public. I'm completely unconscious of it. And then my wife brings it up to me and says, look, I really don't like it when you talk about me like that. It's quite demeaning. And now suddenly it's been brought into my conscious awareness, which we call conscious incompetence. So now I'm conscious and I'm also aware that I have an incompetence there, that I have I have a fault within me. So at this point, I find what the problem people do is they feel like, oh, I've got to get a solution to that. And often they don't have the tools to solve it. And so they basically justify their actions. they say, no, I don't. You've just got, you're just too touchy. You're too sensitive.
Mm.
I was just joking.
Mm.
And it's a sort of a cover up for really wanting to, really dealing with the situation. Why? Because you don't really deep down, you don't consciously, unconsciously, you don't know how to deal with the situation. And I say this is the big mistake here, because we try to acknowledge this is a problem and just explore it without having to solve it. I say exploring the question without trying to find the answer to it.
Yeah.
And once we can, sorry,
I'm sorry to interrupt you,
yeah,
but
go on.
it's like we want to make a hukum on things. We want to just make a declaration on things and kind of make sense of it by boxing it. It's like, it's okay if we don't put it into a box, we don't name it, we don't even blame anybody for what's going on here. But can we find some solutions? Something's been grievously wrong here, whatever the case may be. I have a case that just came to my mind, but there's endless permutations and combinations of situations that arise in our community worldwide. Nature of temperaments and our nature and different energetics and different styles of communication, and all these problems arise, but there's these core issues that, and there's certain patterns that emerge through these core issues that if we can just begin to entertain them, if you will, just hold space for them.
Yeah.
So quick.
Without solving them first. That's the important thing, because it's like, can you be with it that you, like in this simple example here, can you be with it that you upset your wife without throw that discomfort onto her, or for you just to go into a shutdown response and just like, well, this is me, you got to accept who I am. Like, what's that like for you? What's that like for me? Can we explore it? Like, and I talk about this on the 7 levels of experience, not cognitively necessarily. That's one part, but also what's that like to be with that experience? And what's really interesting is that when you sit with experiences and you can hold them, solutions naturally emerge, rather than you snatching, oh, we've got to solve this now. Because if we feel like we have to solve it there and then, we usually get overwhelmed and it's never effective. And we see the Prophet ﷺ demonstrate, I always quote this hadith, but the Prophet ﷺ, when he's holding his dying son, he doesn't go to cognition first, because this is a big issue. This is someone dying in your life. If you jump to why is this happening, what can I do about it, you're actually moving away from the experience, the presence. Absolutely. And that's why he says the eye cries, the heart feels grief, but we don't say anything that doesn't displease Allah. We don't go to cognition here. We're actually, let's just sit with our experience. And when we sit with experience and we can move through that, those experiences of discomfort, and they move through, then it sort of settles and you think, I can see where this fits now. But we live in a society that's constantly wanting to we're solution focused, and we bypass actually being present, and then we wonder why we're so fragmented.
Exactly. No, I love, and every time you tell that story, I mean, it just takes me. It's a breathtaking moment in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. It's so emblematic of exactly what we're talking about here. And the fact that he went to the somatic first, and he went through and processed the emotional, and then to the kind of top-down, cognitive, spiritual. It just shows that he was able to hold the entirety of the human experience. And he demonstrated that for us. And even, it's interesting in the hadith that the Sahaba that were with him were surprised by him. And it's a teaching moment. I mean, maybe they
teaching it. No, what that's now. I've never touched on this point. You've just raised a really important. He taught in his grief. That's incredible.
Allah.
Because you when you're in grief, you want others to be there for you. He was able to be for the Sahaba and educate them when he's in his grief. That's incredible if you think about it.
Habibi. MashaAllah, really beautiful. And honestly, I mean, we can all be like that. I know for sure this happens to you. I'm getting goosebumps now just talking about this. How many moments are you with your client or patient and they have a shift, they have a realization, and it's a gift for you? I mean, this is going on another kind of tangent here, but I mean, just teaching in the grief, and we're all in this together. I mean, there's a shared field. Some have called this the morphic field, the morphic resonance, how there's a subtle connection that connects all of us at the heart level, energetically, whatever, spiritually. And we can begin to really feel that presence through this somatic, emotional, cognitive processing of experience. that the Prophet ﷺ demonstrated for us and taught us. And it's an amazing thing.
It's amazing. Honestly, when you touch into somatics and you go into a lower experience of yourself, you experience profound things. I had once a client who had so much shame that they wouldn't even have a video call with me. They only would do it and I was thinking, oh my God, how do I do somatic work just listening to someone? I've never done that before, and I felt really uncomfortable. And we were on the call, and I just went for a hunch. I was experiencing a lot of heat in my body, and I just, look, I'm going to go on for a hunt. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say, I'm experiencing some major heat in my body. I don't know about you. And he said, I'm sweating. And I was like, this is the power of somatics, is where you really, you can connect to others on a way that you can't cognitively, when you really tap into your sense of yourself. And it's a really missing piece in society today. You know, we ask, what are you thinking, or how do you feel? But we don't say, what are you noticing in your body right now?
That's
you
right.
know, it's just not in our vernacular. But it's an incredibly powerful way for us to really sort of feel connected and belong, and feel a sense of belonging with one another as human beings. Absolutely. And that's essentially what we need to come out of trauma. We need to feel like we belong. And if we don't do that, then we belong in our trauma together.
That's right.
And that's really dangerous, because then you get, I mean, Rasma Menachem, I've just been listening on his audiobook on his grandmother's hands. He speaks about trauma, working trauma with the with the black and white issues in America. And he says everyone's bonding in trauma here, and it causes people to become really sort of insular. And as a community, as Muslims, when I see this as a trauma response, is that when we we fear the outside and won't accept, or we hate the outside, we don't let anything in from the outside, and everything's insular, we know that we're in a trauma vortex there. Because the Prophet ﷺ and the early Muslim communities, they were open to explore other communities of what they had. And the moment we say they have no good, and we, you know, what we have is all we need, when people start using that sort of language, they're evil, we're good, we have all the answers, they're ignorant, we know you're speaking from a perspective of trauma.
Shut down language. It's all shut down language, otherizing language, projective language. I mean, all of that. الحكمة ضالة المؤمن. I often, just in my medicine, use this hadith. A beautiful hadith. الحكمة ضالة المؤمن حيث وجدها فهو أولى بها. He may find that he has more right to it, and the world is fertile for the believer. It's a masjid, and also it's gleaming with insights and blessings and nourishing and supportive things for us. And it's just a matter of us going out there and doing it. But you're right, when trauma strikes and we in some way allow and enable it to take over, it covers over our capacities to connect, our capacities to perceive, our capacities to sense make. I mean, all these different things show up, and it's such a limiting experience. I mean, people often will come and say, I mean, one of the first things they'll feel at the end of the session, even after one session, I feel so free. I feel open. I feel light. I said, take a moment and just feel that in your body, how it's like to be free. Oh, God.
I can let go.
Feel them shifting out of that otherizing, polarized, victimizing self, kind of, I'm small, I'm bad, maybe we're all bad, you know. And there's two ways that can happen. You can say, you know, we're the best and they're all bad. Or there's a lot of shame-based stuff where it's like, I'm horrible. I don't even deserve to exist. And there's a silent type of despair that can come onto that, come in with that. And there's all these different combinations. You know, there's, in NARM, they talk about the pride-based and the shame-based identifications, where the pride-based is like, yeah, we're the best and very grandiose and tribal mentality. And then there's the shame-based stuff, which comes in.
Which is the other side of the pride. Yeah. No, it's really interesting. Elaborate on that, because I think that's really important for people to understand that. Like when someone says, I don't need anyone, that really means what?
I trust nobody, you know, or I'm an island and I am not needy and I'm not weak. It's weak to ask for help. And you find that every time someone says that, every single time someone says that, what they most want for themselves is to trust, is to connect, it's the gaping hole in their hearts. But yet there's all this fortification around it as an adaptation from early experiences, whatever that have
It's
been.
coming from a place of hurt.
They're coming from a place of hurt and pain. And so in some way, this is why we don't shame that, because it was productive. It was this child, however old they were, in whatever situation, and by this intuition of Allah Ta'ala's this rahmah, this inbuilt rahmah, non-verbal, 5-year-old can begin to close their heart and say, okay, out of protection, I'm going to become grandiose. I'm going to become strong. My dad's really big and loud and angry. It seems to work. I'm going to become very loud and whatever, angry. And in some way, it's a coping mechanism. It's a survival strategy. And it's not something they consciously do. And in some way, many of them, the reason they come to us is like they want to shift out of it. But then they'll say, I don't trust anybody. It's like, yeah, that's the old stuff. But you're here now because you want to trust them.
You needed it to protect yourself back then. But now, being strong is actually being able to open yourself up and be vulnerable.
Absolutely. Having more space for yourself and being receptive to people. The type of blocking that happens when we're in our adaptations. And so being more receptive, and this has a lot of even similarities in the way the physical body works, like the gut, and this is a whole other conversation as well, but the gut lining, when it's inflamed, you can have the best diet, but you won't be able to really absorb and assimilate the nutrients because your gut lining and the microbiome are all disturbed. And so you're eating organic and you're evacuating organic. You're not actually, it's not nafi', it's not beneficial. So there has to be a type of exploring what's coming in the way of the receptivity.
You can't receive. That's the word that came from me. I think another really interesting thing is to be very conscious of people, is that when are you working from a place of fear and protection? You're constantly wanting to protect others and you're scared, like, well, you shouldn't read that, or you shouldn't be doing that, and you're constantly wanting to warn people that this is, again, I feel this is a trauma response, is that you don't feel safety. And so you're always listening to your language. And we see this in religious scholarship a lot. It's like, we've got to protect the community. And in the end, we treat the community like children. Is that, like, if you did that to a child, I like to explain it like this, is like, if you do that to a child, you set him forth into the world in a constant fear, and he can't grow. So what we want to do, we want to empower them with principles that feel empowering, so they can go forth and make mistakes and be okay about making mistakes, but also they have the principles to work their way back to Allah, internally from themselves. But what we do is we end up projecting this on the community and treat them like children, in that we try to control them. And I believe that's a trauma. Again, this is a trauma response. Absolutely. And it's so debilitating. And you've got two ways of reacting to that. Is that, like, if someone comes up to me and tells me, Idris, you need to be careful about what you're doing there. Like, you can react in two ways. You can take on board their advice and become fearful, or I can rebel and just say, I'm going to do it even more now you told me what to. No, and obviously there's a middle path where I say, thank you, I'll take that on board. But also, am I going to walk away from that conversation like doubting myself? Or am I going to walk away from that conversation just wanting to say, well, forget you, I'm going to do what I want? Or am I going to take that, but I'm also going to have a sense of self in relationship to that advice and go forth and be willing to make mistakes, and be willing to learn from that, and not live this life going forward of, I've got to always be cautious, because you're always going to be susceptible to anxiety, obsessive compulsive thoughts, which is rife in our community, religiously conscious community as well. So we have to be really conscious of these things.
Totally. The images that came to mind as you were talking about that were suppleness and rigidity. This idea of being supple, being able to give and take, even this idea in Tai Chi called pushing hands, if you're rigid and you're just scared and collapsed and contracted, I mean, you can have a 5-year-old just go, and then you're going to fall over. But if you're able to give and take and really, receive and give and be supple and grounded and able to kind of just move with the flow of things,
Yeah.
You can sit with someone 100 pounds, you know, larger than you, and be able to sit there and maybe even knock them over.
Yeah.
And that's the gracefulness that comes from being, when you're able to really contact this deep, embodied, felt sense that comes from being in your heart and being in some way, you know, healed or healing, in the process of healing.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing. And people that are like that are very graceful. They're very easy. And this is how I feel the Prophet ﷺ. When I
Well,
see
yeah.
him in my mind, I mean, this is beautiful and majestic being.
Well, that's the point. Going back to the Prophet ﷺ, is he made men who could go out on themselves by themselves, and they could have difference of opinion.
Yeah.
They could, you know, they could go like we see the example of that is the Prophet ﷺ beautifully, he walks out of the city with Mu'adh ibn Jabal when he sent him to Yemen. And he says, you know, what are you going to do when you go out there? So he's just asking him open questions. And like, what would you do when you come to, you know, an issue comes to you and you've got, you know, it's a challenging issue. He says, well, look, I'll consult the book of Allah. If that's not, I'll consult the messenger of Allah, the teachings you've imparted to me. And then if not, then I'll use my own, you know, I'll exert my own opinion in this matter. I'll strive to come to some sort of solution to this. And then, you know, the Prophet was so proud of him at that point, because I've made a man out of you. You know, he wasn't controlling this person. He wasn't like, you know, debilitating him. He was enriching him so he could go forth in the world and feel as his own sense of self in relationship to his tradition and his principles. And that's so important for the next generation. Is if we impart the religion in details, we debilitate the child. If we impart principles to these children, so they go forth as the next generation, we empower them because they've got principles. They can work with and assess situations according to those principles. But if we impart so much detail to them, it stifles them. They're like almost, oh my God, I've got to go consult that book and find out what I've got to do in this situation. It's almost makes them lose their sense of self.
Beautiful. Wow. Thank you. And there's so much I want to say here, but I know we wanted to keep these short, CD.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good place to maybe pause for this first installment, inshallah.
Yeah.
And I hope we can pick up right where we left off next time.
No, definitely, honest.
This point
it's
of
been a pleasure.
This point of agency and self-determination, and, you know, being connected to one's inner knowing, oneself, God, other people, through that connection to self.
Yeah.
As the Sufis and the people of God say, "Man arafa nafsahu, arafa."
Yeah, and my last, like an exercise for people, I think, is notice when you get overwhelmed, notice when you feel like the need to solve something, and take a moment just to explore, you know, from a somatic experiencing point of view, what are you experiencing? Rather than jumping to solving things, taking that moment just to sit with your experience and then see what emerges in the moment, rather than you trying to snatch for solutions and think you have to solve everything. I think that's an important practice that people need to adopt in their daily lives.
Yeah, thank you for that. Alhamdulillah.
No problem.
Okay.
Mazen, thank you very much. Allah bless you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. We'll pick up next time, inshallah ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum.
Inshallah. Wa salam.